Welcome to the Shift Your Story, Change Your Life podcast. I'm Allie Rose, certified clinical hypnotherapist and subconscious success coach. I help my clients stop self-sabotage and feel safe to create more wealth, worth, and wellness from within. If you find yourself stuck repeating the same unhelpful patterns in your life, health, business, or relationships, even after all the mindset work, this podcast is for you. Each week, you'll hear deep dives into the hidden beliefs shaping your life and live hypno coaching sessions where someone shifts a block in real time. Because willpower isn't the problem, your subconscious story is. And when you shift it at the root, everything else begins to change. So let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to the Shift Your Story, Change Your Life podcast. This conversation was actually spurred on by a conversation I recently had with a client where we were looking at the subconscious roots of her clutter. And what I want to talk about today is why clutter is rarely just about stuff. Because when we look at clutter through a subconscious lens, it stops being a personal failure or a discipline problem. And it actually starts telling a much more honest story, often about safety, security, scarcity, what your nervous system learned a long time ago. As always, my hope is to remove any shame and talk about what clutter is actually doing for people, why forcing yourself to declutter often backfires, and how to approach change in a way that feels supportive for your system instead of overwhelming. But as always, Safiya, thank you so much for being back here. I'm excited to dive into this. How are you feeling about this topic?
Hey, yeah, I think this is an interesting topic. It's a really interesting topic. So I'm looking forward to hearing a bit more about it from a subconscious perspective and chatting about it with you. I always feel like I leave with a different perspective than when I came in. So it's good.
Yeah, and you do the same for me. I feel like I kind of go in and I have an idea, and then you always challenge me to think about things in a different way. So I love that our listeners get both of our perspective on that. So, yeah.
Okay, so we can dive in. And of course, my favorite starting point is what are we really talking about when we talk about clutter? If you're talking about it in your work, what are you actually referring to?
When I talk about clutter, there's the standard messiness or being bad at organizing. But when I think about it, I'm talking about the places where excess has accumulated, really because a decision doesn't yet feel safe to make. Clutter is usually where something feels unresolved internally. It's physical or even a digital version of like, I don't know what to do with this part of my life, so I'm just leaving it for now. Or for some people, clutter means safety. We'll dive into that a little bit further in the conversation. For others, it holds the possibility of a backup plan, or it's proof that they've made it through something when times were uncertain or scarce. So I really don't see clutter as a problem to fix because that's really the way that a lot of times that it's talked about, laziness, discipline issue, something to be fixed, but I really see it as information. I mean, I'm such a big believer that anything going on in our lives is really information that when we look at it, we can take it in and we can be curious about it and be like, okay, what is that trying to teach me? What is that trying to show me? Right.
Okay. Yeah, I get that. So information. The thing that stood out to me that you said was indecisiveness
Mhm.
in terms of, I don't know what to do with this, so I'm just leave it here and come back to it. I know you mentioned other things such as evidence, proof of survival, etc. And so it's almost like a manifestation of maybe not trusting yourself to make a decision or not being sure or feeling confused or procrastination, other things that we've spoken about. So I find it interesting to hear about those links.
Yeah, absolutely.
Y-
Yeah. So it is there is a big link to not trusting yourself, as well as a lot of other links. It is
Hmm,
very it is very interesting that clutter can be linked to, like you said, so many of the things that we've talked about already in previous episodes. I think most people assume that clutter can be correlated with laziness or a lack of discipline or not caring enough. And to me, that assumption most assumptions create way more damage than the clutter itself, right?
Mm,
What we often don't really realize is that clutter almost always started as a solution. It made sense at some point to your mind. So, for example, to tie back to some of the things that I was saying, if you grew up without enough, keeping things feels practical. Or
mhm,
if your environment felt unpredictable, then holding on to objects creates some sense of stability, some sense of certainty. Those problems don't just disappear because your life looks different now. The nervous
mhm.
system doesn't just update because you logically know that you're okay, right? We've talked about this before, is sometimes it can't tell the difference between what's real or imagined. It can't really tell, and so it can be triggered to continue to repeat the same behaviors, right? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, when people shame themselves for clutter, it just usually reinforces the pattern, right? Because then the system tightens instead of relaxing. And so when
Mm,
someone understands that clutter once helped them or it helped solve a problem or a perceived threat in their life, then they can approach changing the clutter issue without fighting themselves.
hmm. So it's so funny. As soon as you said clutter, I'm a big fan of the show Friends. Don't come for me, please. I
I
love
won't.
it.
I'll
And,
reserve my judgment.
but the reason I mention it is because one of the characters on there, Monica, she's very tidy, clean, everything has its place. And somewhere in one of the seasons, her husband opens up a cupboard and a whole bunch of stuff just like comes tumbling out on top of his head. And she's always like, that's her secret shame room because everywhere else in the house is totally spotless. Everything has a place. Like if you move a fridge magnet, she goes crazy. And then she's got this cupboard that literally just had it's not organized, like, she just stuffed things in there and closed the door, and that is off I think about that when I think about clutter because one of the things I've noticed with people who I know who can have a propensity for clutter is that they can be super organized in other areas of their life, and so you talk about laziness or lack of discipline or whatever, I feel like I can see that from some perspectives, but also I think back to the Monica and
Mm.
to other people that I know of who have some level of clutter. It is usually like that shame room. It's usually like, oh, actually, from the outside, people think, oh, this person's really organized. I remember years and years ago, I knew someone who always looked really well turned out, great dressed, organized, everything. And I remember one day she just had to give me a ride somewhere and she was like, close your eyes before you get into my car. And it was just the car was messy. And so I think back to what you said about the fact that it once solved a problem or it was once a solution for a problem, that it can even be a solution in the midst of the life of somebody who seems quite put together and quite organized.
Yeah, and even in that, right, that solves a problem because
Mm,
as you're saying, if someone is a perfectionist, that means that there's often a lot of hypervigilance, there's often a lot of control that's happening, and it's solving this issue of needing an outlet where you don't have to be perfect, where you can
mhm,
just release control a bit and
mhm,
you can let go, right? So even in that, it solves in some ways because perfectionism, as we've talked about, is unsustainable and can be really hard on the system. And
mm,
so your system can't constantly be in that state. And so it makes sense that there would be a space in your life where you just kind of let go, and it's not even just related to clutter, like, as I'm thinking about it, and this might not
mm,
even be relevant, but, like, perfectionists a lot of times have some area of their life where they have a release, where they let go. It's often not great things, whether they have
mm,
some sort of binge eating or whether they go to alcohol or whether they indulge in other things, but
mm,
I find in perfectionist lives that there's this one area that's kind of secret that
mhm.
they release those perfectionistic tendencies for a little while because it's not sustainable to be that way all the time.
Okay. Wow. All right. That is very interesting. I'm curious then, what is often happening in someone's life when clutter starts to build or feel overwhelming? and also the idea that it was once a solution. I'm assuming at some point there's some sort of turning point where it goes from being a solution to a problem.
Right.
So what tends to be happening in someone's life when that's happening?
Oftentimes people don't come in and they don't wanna, like, work on clutter, but sometimes it comes up as we're working on other things in their lives. And so what I find is that it almost always increases during transition, and not like big obvious transitions. It can be burnout or questioning your direction in life or outgrowing a role or grief that you haven't even named yet or just feeling kind of unsure about what's next. So when your nervous system is already under pressure, decision making then feels heavier. And so
Mm,
then decisions get delayed. And clutter often becomes a holding zone. It's your brain compartmentalizing in some ways and being like, okay, I'll just deal with this later when things feel clear. But the problem is that then that later, right? Or if you're in that perpetual state of overwhelm or burnout or grief or any of the things that I just named, is that then you're continually just putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And then it grows and grows and grows. And then it becomes
uh-huh,
overwhelming to deal with, right?
mhm, yeah, I get that. Yeah, I definitely get that, and it's hard because I think the worse it gets, the harder it becomes to deal with, the easier it is to just put it off, right? So then it becomes cyclical.
Yeah.
Do you find clutter is more often connected to the past versus what people are experiencing right now?
I think that it's always a bit of both. As with most things in our lives, the past will set up the pattern and then the present activates it. So
Mm,
early experiences really shape how we relate to safety, resources, loss, how we cope with things, right? Again, if you didn't have enough growing up, then your system learned that holding on to things was smart. If things were taken away unexpectedly, then, keeping the extra things feels protective. Then something in the present often brings back that old learning pattern, like that old learning back online, right? Stress or uncertainty, pressure or change, right? Your system is responding the way that it learned to.
mhm, okay.
What's coming up for you?
So, I guess one of the things I'm curious about, you mentioned that obviously if someone maybe grew up and they perceived that they didn't have enough at the time, that may lead to a more of a cluttering habit when they get older. I guess I'm also wondering about the sort of relationship to people who grow up in those environments where there is a lot of clutter there anyway. Does that lead to the opposite? Does that lead to them being quite clean? I don't know. I don't know what word to use. Is it that the same habit shows up in response to different things or what happens there?
So I think it really depends, right? I can speak from personal experience. My mom grew up not having a lot. And so we had more things around than I would like. There was clutter, I would say. There was clutter. And I am very much the opposite. I am very
Mm,
much I don't collect like little tchotchkes. I am a cleaner, a purger. I love the feeling of simplicity and cleanliness. I would say my brother is the same. So that is the opposite of what we grew up in. Now, I know someone whose mother has a lot of clutter and grew up in that environment, and they have a propensity to follow in the same pattern.
mm,
So I think that it really just depends on the person. I don't think that there's necessarily if you grew up in clutter, then you're the opposite, or if you grew up in clutter, then you will also have clutter, right?
yeah. Okay. I think I was just curious because I do agree that clutter is about more than just stuff.
Right.
I guess I was just curious because I think it's easy to just put a blanket sort of statement on it, like, oh, if people have clutter, this is a problem, that type of thing. And I guess I was wondering for a person who may be dealing with their own clutter, how do they get to the heart of
Mm.
what the cause of it is? Even though it would be pretty obvious to somebody who walks into your place that there's clutter there, I find quite often people aren't don't either don't seem aware of it themselves or they become blind to it or they can justify their reasons for every single thing that they have. So I guess my question is like, How could a person start to understand the root of their anger?
Right. It can be helpful because it's so hard sometimes. It's why as a therapist, I have a therapist because I can't I can therapize myself only to a certain point. And
Mhm.
that's why if you have a real issue with clutter, that it can often be, it can often be helpful to work with someone else or to even get like a trusted person involved to kind of reflect back. And I even think that the first step, it's not even about getting rid of the stuff. It's about noticing what emotion comes up for you when you think about getting rid of the stuff. The emotional
Mm.
root of things can often lead you back to what this is actually about. I'm thinking about someone who has a lot of clutter, and I know that it's related to grief. It's related to the loss of someone in their life, and it's related to not wanting to get rid of things from this person, even though it is now impacting their life in a negative way. I don't know that that person would necessarily say that that's what it is, right? Let me give you an example. I had this cat bank, this little cat bank whenever I was growing up. And I for the longest time, I just was a person who I loved cleaning my room. I loved getting rid of stuff. And I'll never forget I came home from I guess it was like college that point, and I was getting rid of this. I found it in the closet. I was getting rid of this cat bank, and I remember taking it downstairs along with this pile of other things, and my mom started crying, and she kept the cat bank. I don't think she still has it because she has since shifted things in her own life, but at that
Mhm.
moment, there was something there for her that brought up maybe it was a grief of I had just gone off to college. So maybe there was some sort of grief or loss around losing her baby and seeing the cat bank, which if she hadn't seen it, she probably would have never known that I was getting rid of it and it wouldn't have brought up the emotions, but it was because she saw me walking with it to the trash, basically, that she saw it and it brought something up. And so she kept it, right? So
Mm.
it was tied to something emotional in that moment. I didn't understand at the time, I was probably harsh with her about it at the time, like, "What do you like,
I'm
what's
getting
wrong
rid of
with
this cat bag.
right, like, I don't need it, you don't need it." But now as an adult, I have a much better understanding of how it wasn't actually about the cat bank, it was about what that represented to her.
Yeah, I get that. Why do you think items are so emotionally charged?
It's this idea of letting go, it's grief, it's loss. Our minds never want to lose anything, right? Even when we're talking about, like, losing weight, I often tell my clients, "Don't say you're losing weight, say that you're releasing it. You're gratefully releasing it," because our minds don't wanna lose things. So, for some people, this idea of just in case things fall apart, just in case I need this version of myself again, I think of holding on to clothing that no longer fit anymore, right? And it's like you're having to release an older version of you that maybe you haven't accepted where you are now in life. So it
Mhm,
just brings up so much emotionally for people and maybe not being in a place of accepting where you are in your life at this moment,
mhm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And what are people gaining from the clutter? Because I think, that can be happening too. Like there's some kind of low level benefit from having this thing there, whatever the thing may be.
Right. What comes up in that regard is preparedness.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
I need to be prepared. If something bad happens, I won't be caught without, right? Like, you're covered. And again, it kind of goes back to people maybe who didn't grow up with a lot or without enough. It can feel like insurance in some ways, right? And for people who live
Mhm,
in chaos, it can feel stabilizing, right? Or it can feel like options. You can keep your options open so you don't have to commit or like risk choosing wrong.
mm.
And
Yeah,
again, none of that is wrong. Whatever it is, it's again, it's just information, right?
yeah. And, earlier on, we talked about the sort of aspect of safety. I don't know if we can just dive into that a little bit more. How does having an abundance of stuff around you, what's the link between that and safety?
I think it goes back to what I just said, which is the preparedness. I won't have to be
Mm,
without. There's a scarcity mentality There's a feeling that there won't be enough. There's this pie, and you need to make sure that you get your piece of the pie. And so I think that people can feel like having an overabundance of things, they'll always be prepared, they'll always have enough. It's a false sense of safety, right?
Mm,
It's not a real sense of safety because at some point it becomes a problem. And that's always the thing that I work with my clients on seeing and understanding is like, okay, we understand, we have the awareness of like where this came from, this thought process, right? Is it actually working? Is it actually real? Is it actually providing you safety? Or have the scales tipped so far in the other direction that now what once felt like safety now feels like it's suffocating you because you have all of
mm,
the stuff around, right?
yeah. And it's interesting when you talk about safety because, earlier you talked about that previous version of yourself. Sometimes I think there's safety in that previous version of yourself. I've been guilty of doing it myself, and I know other people who, for a long time, have this idea that they can return to this time in their life when dot, 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 right? When they were happier, when they were slimmer, when they were younger. I mean, I tell you, I keep thinking to myself, like, when is it gonna be that I'm gonna be 30, 35 again, and I'm gonna feel like I have energy and all of that, and keeping the things that feel like the safety of a known time
Right.
over this current situation, which may feel a bit unknown. I myself have gone through the feeling like there was this previous time or previous version of myself, which I'm sure I'm romanticizing. I'm pretty sure, you know, good stuff and ridiculous stuff was happening then as it is now as well.
Right.
But just romanticizing like, oh, and keeping things around for when that time comes again. I don't know if you and I have ever had this conversation, but when I moved to the UK about 3.5 years ago, I got rid of like 19% of my stuff. And that was one of the most that experience I felt really transformational for me, and I've always found it hard to explain, but it felt like going through all of that stuff to get rid of it, I suddenly realized how much stuff I kept for all of the reasons that we were talking about. I had these notes from a diploma that I finished in, like, 2008 or something. I left Barbados in 2022, okay? And I had a humongous box with all the notes and textbooks and everything, and I have a friend who came over, and she was great to help me kinda get rid of my stuff. And I remember her being like, Saf, you these books are so out of date right now, like, why are we and I'm just like for me, it was almost like I want to prove to myself there's a version of me that could do this master's level program, even though now I feel like I can barely string 2 sentences together, but actually somewhere in there is that person, and here's the proof that I did it, or I had so much stuff, and actually every single thing that you just mentioned is connected to one of these items, and I feel like getting rid of that stuff I know that's not what we're talking about because I know you as you said, it's not about getting rid of the stuff, but working through that process, and I will tell you, a friend of mine helped me, and it did take about 2 years where I didn't get rid of 90% of my stuff the day that I left, like, it took 2 years for her to come over every week and be like, "Okay, I think we can get rid of this today," you know, and working through what was causing me to hang on to that stuff in the first place, so,
Yeah.
mm, and just to those who are listening, these were physical pieces of paper, okay? Like, I did this degree in early 2000s. I did a distance learning course, and I used to print things, put
Right.
them in an envelope, and send them
Right.
and they would send
Right.
them back to me. I had literal files
Right.
full of paper,
Yes.
and I never looked at it again. Like, I had not even looked. They were in a box that had not opened for about 15 years.
Yeah.
And as soon as Karen was like, "Let's get rid of this," I was like, "No! You can't get rid of this." And she's like,
Right.
"Is everything okay?" So, yeah, no, I think it's relatable, maybe not on the TV show level, but I can see how it's relatable for all of us having something in our lives which we hold on to that serves a purpose above and beyond the thing itself.
Absolutely. It is interesting to me as I think back. I think part of the reason why I am the way that I am in terms of, like, not having clutter, being very simplified is what I grew up in, but also I have moved many, many times. I've moved like, oh my gosh, I've probably moved at this point like 20 sometime.
Mm,
And so for me, I'm remembering moves that I had that it was painful. It was painful to move because I was carrying all of this stuff with me. And so the older that I got, the more I just started feeling like I just need to make this as simple as possible. What do I actually need to feel happy? Can I take pictures of things and put them in a memory book in some regard, the memory bank,
yeah,
or whatever it is? But I think when you move a lot, you are able to release things a little bit more easily because you have to go through things versus people who've been in their homes for, 30, 40, 50
years,
years. And you're like,
yeah.
okay, that is a lifetime of stuff. And you've never moved. So you've never had any reason to go through any of this.
I can see how people can do it on a larger scale and on a smaller scale. Now, one of the things I learned through getting rid of that stuff and thinking about it, I had a friend who came and helped me, and she's like you. She likes clean, she likes tidy, she likes to purge, but she's a very gentle person. So I think she was the right person to do it for me and not be like, "Ah, get rid of stuff." She was very gentle about it, which I think was really helpful. And as I was working with her, I kept feeling like, "Oh, why can't I do this myself? Why can't I, why did it take this friend coming to work with me?" Why do you think discipline and willpower doesn't usually help or might backfire in the situation if someone's trying to get rid of their stuff?
There comes a point in time when willpower and discipline work. But I think that if you're just trying to willpower your way through it, what I find is that people will get rid of stuff and then it suddenly just fills back up with like more stuff.
Nature abhors the vacuum. I was
Right.
literally as soon as you said it, I was like, "Nature abhors the vacuum." I know so many people who have gotten rid of stuff,
Right.
and stuff just it's like it walked back in through the door.
Right. But that's because they didn't get to the underlying reason of why they started collecting all of the things in the first place. Willpower, discipline, hardcore discipline, it ignores that safety and that emotional piece of things. So forcing yourself to declutter sends that message that your concerns, your emotions, that they don't matter. And basically, when your nervous system hears that, it pushes back and it's like, oh, yeah. That's why, like I said, people purge slowly or quickly refill the space, right? So,
Mm,
yeah,
yeah.
real change never comes from overpowering yourself. It comes from feeling safe enough to release, it comes from working with yourself.
And you talk about stuff coming back in and filling the space back up. And what is interesting is that whenever I've seen that happen to people, they can give you another totally logical reason why this new set of stuff has now shown up, and not seeing it as a pattern
Right,
that like they're struggling with the space that opens up when the things are gone.
right.
Do you think that that's a factor as well? Like suddenly having space?
Yeah, I mean, it's like if somebody's constantly listening to something in their ear. That can be a kind of clutter as well, because then you don't have to sit with your thoughts, right? A
Mm,
clear space brings quiet. Quiet brings awareness. Awareness brings decisions or responsibility or sitting with thoughts and feelings that the clutter has acted as a buffer, right? So you don't have to sit with
mm,
uncertainty or ask bigger questions about why you did X, Y, or Z, or are you really happy, or what do you want next? So,
yeah.
and then for some people, the clear space, it brings up a lot of questions about identity. I don't have these things. Who am I? Who am I if I got rid of, oh my gosh, I think I posted online last year as we were getting ready to move. I opened up a suitcase and I found my old cheerleading jacket, right? And it felt it felt so like there was a bit of nostalgia, but there was also like a bit of hilariousness to it because if that's even a word, um,
Yeah. All words are made up. Let's do it.
hilarity, hilariousness, because I'm so not that person anymore, right? Now,
Mm,
for some people, their identity is tied so strongly to their things or to what those things represent. That would have been a really hard thing for them to get rid of, right?
mm,
Because it's like, who am I without this thing? What does that mean about my
yeah.
identity, right?
Yeah, or I'm thinking back to, what I said earlier about finding comfort in that past version of yourself. You know, I know people who've had that similar experience where they may feel like they had something taken away from them, right? Maybe they felt like they were an athlete and then they had an injury or something. They don't want to get rid of because they feel comfort in being an athlete, even if they don't feel like they're there anymore. So comfort in that past version of themselves, that identity, almost like not liking the identity of the person they are now and wanting a tie back to a version of themselves that they again romanticize or they feel more connected to.
Yeah, it's like, who am I without the proof of who I was, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. So one of the things we talked about earlier was that idea of just seeing what emotions come up when you think of getting rid of the thing,
Right.
right? And sort of letting that be the first step. But it sounds like you're also saying this may be something, if it's something that's really a concern to you, you may need some kind of external support with it.
You may need external support. You could do it yourself, but if you I often think that if you are really struggling, if you recognize that the clutter has gotten to a place where it's impacting your life in a negative way, then it's probably wise to enlist the help of someone, like you said, a gentle, safe person who's not going
Mm,
to shame you for everything that you have accumulated. If you're working with somebody who's going to shame you, and sometimes, I see that between partners in relationship where they shame the other person for these things versus coming from a place of compassion or understanding, right? So I think there's the emotional component of things, and then I think there's also just starting small. As with most
mm,
things in life, it's not throwing yourself into the deep end and saying swim if you don't know how to swim. It's like committing to something very small. Maybe it's literally just a drawer or something,
mm,
and being willing to sit with whatever emotions come up and being consistent about it. If someone really wants to commit to it, it's like, "Okay, you know what? I'm gonna do an hour a week." This is what I just said to one of my clients. "Just do an hour a week." An hour gives you enough time to maybe get a small space, but it also gives you enough time to deal with some of the emotions that might come up.
mm.
But then commit to that consistently, right? And really during that time, it's about power and in some ways control. It's about looking at, okay, well, younger version of me got X, Y, and Z, but who am I now? And do I need X, Y, or Z now in my life? And so getting to choose, like, I love cleaning out a room or moving everything out and then slowly deciding what's going to come back into the room because there is a lot of power and control and choice within that, right?
Mm.
Yeah, so you're creating space to see yourself more clearly. It's a
Yes.
really a gift that you get to give to yourself. Not only like, "Who am I now?" but, "Who am I becoming?" So
Mhm.
you get to kind of dream for, who do I want to become, and what things match up with who I want to become, not just who I've been.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely
Yeah,
agree with.
that starts to build that trust with yourself I kinda wanna circle it back to what you brought up in the beginning is building trust with yourself is that consistency that I said about doing this 1 hour a week, something like that. The consistency, it helps you to start to trust your own voice. It starts to help you to trust, like, okay, I'm anchoring and I'm grounding into this version of myself.
Mm,
I'm honoring who I was. I'm honoring the emotions and feelings that I have around these things. And I'm also trusting myself to make the best decision for who I am now and who I want to be. Right.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, no, I really like that.
Wonderful. So, feels like a good place to wrap up. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, this has been a really great conversation. It's something I've thought about a lot, so it's been nice to hear the subconscious roots of it and think that through as well. Hopefully, someone out there will find it helpful as they start to think about their own relationship to their thing.
And if there's one thing that I hope that you take away from this episode is that clutter is not a character flaw. It's not proof that there's something wrong with you, that you're not disciplined enough, you don't have enough willpower. It's usually just proof that your system learned how to keep you safe in a world that didn't always feel predictable, supportive, or safe for you. And so, as always, when you approach clutter with curiosity instead of criticism, everything changes. You stop fighting yourself and you start to build trust with yourself. You start working with yourself. And if you're listening to this and realizing that clutter is just one place where you see this pattern showing up in your life and you're ready to understand what's underneath it, I'd love to connect with you. You can head to shiftyourstorypodcast.com and schedule a connection call. We'll talk about what you're navigating and what support could look like for you. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, for being willing to look a little deeper. We're sending you so much love and gratitude. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Shift Your Story, Change Your Life podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to send me a message on social media. I'm at the Allie Rose on both Facebook and Instagram. And if you want to be coached on a future episode or explore what it would look like to work with me one-on-one, head over to shiftyourstorypodcast.com. And if you never want to miss an episode, make sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review. It helps more people find this work. Until next time, keep shifting, keep growing, and most importantly, I want you to remember that your story isn't set in stone. You always have the power to shift it.